everyone, welcome to INSEAD in the case launch of this case titled Binance Ecosystem Leadership in Uncertain Times. My name is Wesley Koo. I am an assistant professor of strategy at INSEAD. And I'm very happy to present this case with my co-authors, who are Mansoor Madhavji, who is a partner at Blockchain Founders Fund, and Aly Madhavji, who is a senior blockchain fellow and also a former alum at INSEAD. And we're also very happy to have Ms. Jana Baumgartner with us, who will be in charge of taking the questions and answers from the audience. And fun fact, she is currently a student at INSEAD, and she's also in my class right now. Okay, well, let's begin formally. The case is titled Binance Ecosystem Leadership in Uncertain Times. And in this case launch, as a professor at INSEAD, I would really like to sort of mimic the classroom experience for many of you, because I've seen some familiar faces, familiar names for my former students, and I think half the audience are actually INSEAD grads. And of course, to the other half of participants who are from the industry, various companies, organizations, please feel free to enjoy and dive in this experience as well. All right, so just an overview of what we did to write this case. The year was 2019, so Ali, Mansoor, and I got together and thought about writing a case about Binance. And 2019 was right after sort of 2018. A lot of things happened in the crypto industry in 2018. So we thought, how Binance is able to serve as an ecosystem leader in a nascent ecosystem that was characterized by a lack of legitimacy in the eyes of many individuals. And we had a conversation with the founder of Binance, CZ, or Changpeng Zhao, in November of 2019 to kick things off. And afterwards, we collected a lot of qualitative data from many sources to write this case. So to kick things off, I would like to ask everyone, all the participants, a poll question. So a poll is going to pop up to ask you, how familiar are you with cryptocurrencies? And three choices: whether you own crypto wallets, whether you are familiar but you don't own a crypto wallet, or you are not familiar at all. So let's take a second to answer these questions first. Oh, wow, okay. I'm seeing a lot of responses right now. And I think you're seeing the results on your screen as well. It's very evenly split. So 40% of us actually own a crypto wallet. So I guess you guys are sort of the adopters, or some of you are early adopters of the crypto industry. And another 40%, you say you're familiar, but you don't own any crypto wallets. So you're observing the scenery and be like, maybe you're deciding whether you should enter or not, but you're decently familiar. And 25%, which is a huge percentage, a quarter of us are not familiar at all. Okay, let's move forward. And we have a second question for everyone, the second poll. How often do you use the Binance platform? Especially for those of you who answer you own a wallet. Let's take a second. All right, 73% of you said you never use the Binance, and 27% said either often or occasionally. So this is very useful data for me and for the co-authors, because we're seeing that, sure, a lot of people might be familiar, but even the world's biggest exchange, Binance, most of us actually don't use it. But having said that, let's take a look at how Binance got into this leadership position in the first place. So an overview of Binance versus other exchanges here. So Binance is the world's largest crypto exchange with 30 million users across 180 countries. Last year, 2021, it had about $20 billion in revenue and $1 billion in terms of profits. And this chart is basically showing you Binance's overall size in terms of crypto volume compared to the other major exchanges, such as Coinbase and FTX. So back in 2020, the data is from 2020, Binance in terms of crypto volume traded is over $1 trillion USD. In the second place, FTX was about 40% of it. And actually in 2021, Binance crypto volume 7 times multiplied by, and it was about 7 trillion USD in 2021. So you can see the enormous growth over time. And back in 2017 was really when Binance was founded. There was an ICO boom. I think many of us still remember. Initial coin offerings were everywhere. And you follow this white line, you will see that the ICO boom reached its peak in terms of number of ICOs around June of 2018. In terms of 2017, June, that was the peak in terms of total amount of funds raised. So how did Binance start, right? Actually started less than 5 years ago. For such a big company in a dominant position, it's actually a very, very young company. So let's go back to its roots. The founder of Binance, CZ, was a computer science grad from McGill University in Canada. So he's a Canadian Chinese. In his early work experience, he focused on using the computer science to create specialized high-performance software targeting trading companies and the stock exchanges. And he had a work experience in Tokyo, in New York, and several other cities. He actually invested in BTC, or Bitcoin, for the first time around 2013 after attending a poker game. So 4 years later, after 2013, 2017, he and his team had already built the infrastructure for the crypto exchange and was in the process of fundraising for this exchange. Well, with the ICO boom, CZ for a long time was actually not into the idea of ICOs. But on the fateful day, on June 14th, 2017, he had a hot pot dinner with a few friends in the city of Chengdu in China. And he got convinced and it changed his mind, right? And within 72 hours, so within 3 days, he and his team drafted the Binance ICO white paper and published a few days later. And the underlying product, right, was the Binance exchange. And that's how Binance was born as an exchange. On June 24th, we can say 10 days later, registration opens for allocations with 9,000 users rushing in. And the picture on the right was basically Binance's team at the time. They were basically meeting over these hot pot dinners and also a lot of the takeout food. And in July, they finished ICO and raised $15 million US dollars in terms of fundraising funds. And that was a celebration lunch. Okay. So in terms of the exchange itself, the product itself, I think Binance, a concept Binance really emphasized was that of freedom. So that's the vision, right? So the vision is to increase the freedom of money globally. And they believe that by spreading this freedom, they can significantly improve lives around the world. So that's the vision statements. In terms of the mission is to provide a core infrastructure. So keyword here is infrastructure, right? In a way, it's not so different from the traditional infrastructure companies like roads companies, railroad companies, that they're providing the basis on which a lot more things can be built, all right? Global reach is enormous, over 180 countries. By the way, this data is from 2019, so maybe more countries these days. And now if you highlight last aspect, which is the acceptance rate on projects applying to be listed on Binance is less than 3%. So it's actually very tough for a third-party developer to publish their project on the Binance platform. Something that's very important for Binance is the Launchpad. And it's basically a playground for new project creation. As you can see here, one of the famous projects that was launched on Binance was Axie Infinity. It's one of the biggest play-to-earn games that was super popular in a lot of countries, in particular the Philippines, where individual users play this game to earn cryptos in the process. And that was launched as a part of the Launchpad initiative. All right, well, this is Binance's internal ecosystem here. So as you can see, they advertise that they have different research facilities and labs for education, academy for education, sorry, and trust wallet, Launchpad, etc. But what is really Binance's ecosystem? By that, I mean, what is the real external ecosystem Binance was facing. In other words, let's focus on the concept of complementers. When we talk about ecosystem strategy, a complementer is an individual or organization who is very, very important in order for a value proposition to propagate, right? So when you talk about the Apple ecosystem, a key complementer would be the third-party developers who create the apps people can download. They are external to the leader of the ecosystem, but they play a very important function. So let's put Binance Exchange in the center of the ecosystem as the ecosystem leader. And who are the main complementers in the ecosystem? Let's think about them as I list them out. Well, first you have the users. Next to you have the third-party developers, the coin makers. Then we have the society at large, and the society's opinions really matter. And then we have the government, right? Governments and regulators across the countries have different regulations that affect the success of finance. And finally, we have banks and the traditional, financial institutions. And here, I would like to use a framework that we in the INSEAD classroom use to teach about ecosystems. We are going to use the traffic light framework, where we assign green light, yellow light, and red light to indicate whether the complementer is actually incentivized to participate in this ecosystem, or whether they're disincentivized and the incentives are misaligned. So in terms of green light, I would argue that the coin developers, the third-party coin developers, are green light because they're very much incentivized to publish and list their coins on Binance to reach as many users as possible. I would argue that the existing users are yellow lights because a lot of users are sort of waiting, as the polls indicate, whether to put more money in because there are a lot of uncertainties associated with the security and also the future outlook of the ecosystem, right? And I would argue that, the society is actually yellow light as well. I mean, there are people for and against, crypto, the crypto industry in general. But a lot of people are still waiting for a clear signal. Banks, it's either red light or a yellow light, right? I mean, on one hand, banks are really afraid of the encroachment or the erosion of the potential erosion of their business as traditional institutions. But at the same time, they see opportunities to work with newly rising, crypto organizations to advance their reach to more people around the world. What's the big red light here? I think we're all seeing the same picture here. That's the government, right? Regulators and governments around the world are a big red light because the incentive structure is actually not aligned and very, very wary about the societal and the financial consequences of cryptos when the industry is nascent and a lot of things are uncertain. So it's really about addressing this red light of the government. That's a key risk faced by Binance in its ecosystem. Well, so the first strategy Binance uses to address the red light of the government is that of agility. You gotta be super agile in uncertain times. So it's indicated, or it's evidenced by the fact that Binance was able to move its headquarters overnight from one country to the other. So in August of 2017, rumors were circulating that the Chinese government was planning to implement a nationwide ban on crypto exchanges and miners. Crypto's events were shut down. No official announcement was out yet, but Binance caught wind of it, right? So that was going to be a major event in the crypto industry because 80% of the world's Bitcoin activity at the time was taking place in China alone. So basically, overnight, Binance moved all of the 200 cloud-based servers from Alibaba to Amazon Web Services, AWS. And this was done overnight, August 29th, 2017. And within a couple of days, Binance secured visas for all of its employees and moved the team to Japan. And a similar thing happened in Japan. 6 months later, in March, the Japanese Financial Services Agency sent a letter demanding that Binance hosts its operations, and also wanted to limit the number of coins Binance can have on the platform. And within 24 hours, CZ engaged in conversations with the government of Malta. And 1 day later, the Prime Minister of Malta tweeted a message to welcome Binance to Malta. So how did Binance, which is a leader in a multi-billion-dollar industry, manage to relocate itself overnight and twice within a span of 6 months? Well, there are a few things. Well, first of all, it's a very flexible organization and had a lot of flexible work hours. It was operational across all time zones, given the nature of crypto trading. It's basically nonstop. Moreover, the employees actually not pay through their bank accounts, but they're paid in BNB, which is the coin of Binance. Moreover, so Binance was able to use rely very heavily on Telegram and WhatsApp groups. CZ himself was involved in over 600 chat groups. So these live messaging apps basically helped CZ and the team to be very flexible, very agile in the process. And finally, Binance adopted a user-centric strategy, so no longer traditional shareholder-centric view, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to move overnight so quickly. And users are our investors, according to our interview with CZ, and which resulted in a strategy of hyper-localization, where in each country, they have a different set of strategy and different set of rules and protocols to cater to the local users, whether be it Turkey or Nigeria. Moving forward, another thing Binance was facing was a lack of trust in the overall ecosystem. I think it's a very important point here because, even if Binance is super agile, can move location overnight and live a nomadic life, if you will, it's not going to succeed if the ecosystem doesn't succeed, right? If the general public doesn't have trust in this ecosystem, especially in 2018, was a crypto winter. When the coin prices dropped by so much, and also the ICOs lost steam, right? And there are also a lot of scams at the time. Binance itself was a victim of scams and hacks at the time, right? So market confidence was super low. So what did Binance do to rebuild trust or restore trust in this nascent ecosystem? Well, a couple of things they did. The first one is gatekeeping. So it's a strategy commonly associated with the platform companies, where you set the rules on who can enter and who cannot. Specifically, Binance implemented new rules for project creation, for something called IEOs, right? Initial exchange offerings, which has very strict vetting process, and it would also help with project development for the third-party developers. And they did a launch through the Launchpad, right? So that's a new gatekeeping protocol they devised in order to restore trust to the ecosystem, right? Second thing they did was to build and to maintain infrastructure. So this is evidenced by their acquisition of CoinMarketCap, or CMC, which is a crypto data aggregator a lot of us use to check the price of coins, market cap, et cetera, et cetera. So by doing this, I think their goal is to kind of solidify the infrastructure and make sure the standards are up to par to publicize the information that's useful for crypto traders or even lay people, laymen around the world. So I would like to end my presentation part by presenting a particularly relevant framework on the adoption curve, right? And I think this framework speaks not only to Binance, but also to the entire crypto industry. So let's take a look. Well, let's say all of the potential customers of potential adopters of the crypto industries can be represented in this bell curve. And it can be divided into different segments of the population. So we say that the first 16% of these potential customers are early adopters and innovators. So these people are very, very ready to pick up a new technology or buy into a new concept. So they're very enthusiastic about cryptos. So if you go to Twitter or go to the Reddit forums or any one of the Telegram groups, you're very likely to encounter a lot of these folks who are basically super enthusiastic about cryptos and very bullish and pushing for cryptos all the time. But the thing is that most of us, or most of the potential customers, are not like the initial 16%. The majority customers, they are actually very hesitant in one dimension or another, because they're very pragmatic instead of enthusiastic. They're waiting to see, whether cryptos are safe, whether cryptos can be adopted more widely, whether they can use it for shopping, etc., etc. And the thing is, there is a huge chasm between the early adopters and the majority customers. A chasm that is very difficult for anyone to cross. The fundamental reason is because the early adopters and majority customers are very, very different people. And Binance realizes this, companies like Binance, so they want to be the leaders of the ecosystem to restore the trust and build a trust in ecosystem in order to bridge the gap between the early adopters and the majority customers. So with that, I hope this serves as some food for thought in terms of our opinions or predictions about the cryptos industries in general, and also about Binance. I would like to maybe open the floor up to a fireside chat with my co-authors, who are definitely the innovator parts of the bell curve. I would like to propose maybe a couple of questions for them to answer about the crypto industry and Binance specifically. Okay. All right, so welcome Aly, welcome Mansoor, how are you?
Doing well, thanks so much for having us.
All right, awesome. All right, to kick things off, maybe you have 3 questions for today. So first question, I'd like to ask Aly. So Binance wasn't actually the first crypto exchange, right? So there's several or many before Binance. So what do you think really differentiated Binance when they first launched?
This is a really good question, and this actually comes up a fair bit. I know from people that are sort of looking back at, how did this journey really emerge? So I'm going to give you a little bit of an anecdote as well, right, in terms of my personal experience. But, in the early days when we would go on trading on, say, like Bittrex, Kraken was there, Coinbase was also around. You had a lot of issues using exchanges. Poloniex was another one, but I remember trying to execute trades on Kraken, for example, and you'd spend hours with just failed trades, right? And this was just, you couldn't actually put even like limit orders in effectively because there would be so many failures with that system. The UI that you would see on exchanges was always very complex. So you saw one side, which was exchanges just offering, say, Bitcoin trading, or the ability to purchase Bitcoin or maybe Ethereum. And then you saw a few others. There was, Bittrex, Kraken, Poloniex that were offering other currencies, but the UI was very difficult to use. So this actually created a lot of issues. So not only those technical issues, but a lot of those UI issues that just made it complicated for new users. Then you had the issues of, a lack of, say, mobile apps, which a big part of the world uses mobile first now. And then you didn't have very good customer support. So when you had all of these issues, there was no one oftentimes to contact. And even if there was, they just wouldn't respond. And, Binance approached this in a very different way. So they launched, with a very clean UI, 24/7 support. The PGA technology, which they used, which was CZ's previous company that he had founded, could execute 1.5 million transactions per second. And that was a very big deal, at the time.
Thank you, Aly, for the answer. So relatedly, I have a question for Mansoor. So what was so unique about Binance's decision to launch a token in 2017?
Yeah, so thanks, Wesley. I think there's a couple factors. So I think one, of course, the underlying technology, right, which Aly touched on, the strong exchange technology. So CZ had already been planning to build an exchange, right? He already was interested in the crypto space. He already had purchased Bitcoin. And so when he did this dinner that you mentioned earlier in your presentation with notable people from the crypto industry, such as Da Hongfei, Chris Marsalek, Roger Ver, and he was convinced at this dinner that an ICO would be the right path for Binance. He got his team quickly to put together a white paper. Now, previous to that, CZ had always taken the position that the exchange was going to service the industry and never do an ICO. But when he went to that dinner, I guess his mind was changed. And 2017 June, when Binance did the ICO, was essentially the first month that ICO, really took off. It was the start of the boom that went on for the next year. So from a timing perspective, it's still very early before a lot of other people had done it. So I think that these were kind of the reasons, but he essentially saw that the token could be a value driver for the Binance ecosystem, right? So it can reward users for participating, can function, for user acquisition and that sort of thing. And so I think that's where the decision came into play. And of course, it was much faster to fundraise using an ICO than to go traditional route.
Right. Can I ask a follow-up question to that, Mansoor? Aly, you feel free to answer as well. I mean, a lot of other companies launched as ICOs at the time, or even after that. So what's unique about Binance's approach in their ICO compared to other companies?
I think a few things. To be honest, there was a lot of successful ICOs, and it didn't always matter at the time, at least, if companies were delivering on their promises. So you had a lot of companies launch tokens, and some of those products never even launched, right? Or they launched much later and not the same way as what was promised. I think the big thing that CZ did as well was he actually launched the exchange 12 days after they launched the token, right? And delivering on those promises was a very big indicator to the market. Having said that, there was a lot of projects that got funded, right? Not all of them, of course, had the performance of BNB because Binance kept delivering on promises, growing that ecosystem. And then it allowed them to do some of those things that you mentioned in your presentation as well. For example, paying their employees effectively without using the existing banking system. There could have been other ways to do that. But you also had the side where the market didn't recognize that as well right away, right? So right after launch, BNB actually took a very big fall. And that also created a lot of issues for CZ. People did think there was, it was potentially a scam, or, the market price was falling. People were really concerned. So there was that angle as well that they had to get over.
It was very nascent ecosystem itself, and a lot of filled with, I guess, uncertainties, if I may. All right, thank you, Aly Mansoor. So let's switch gear a little bit. I have another question for Aly. So I think this question is relevant for a lot of organizations other than crypto organizations. So right now, after COVID, in the post-pandemic era, decentralized management becomes all the more important, right? So what about Binance's strategy and organization allow them to excel at decentralized form management?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things here that are really important to note, right? In terms of how that sort of agility, how that remote sort of ability to run a company sort of almost became a necessity to Binance, right? So if you think about it, in the early days of Binance, they were forced to leave China overnight. And this actually created a really big challenge where they had to, move everything digitally outside of servers from Alibaba to Amazon Web Services, with servers distributed globally. And then, soon after, they had a similar issue in Japan, right? Where, they actually had to basically leave Japan for Malta, and a lot of their team continued to be distributed. But, these sorts of things, and that was at the first one. The first one was when they only had 30 employees, right? When they moved to Japan. And so that started to force almost a necessity to operate fully remote with all of these, uncertainties. And then it happened again, and it sort of solidified that. So that was part of, fueling that, that necessity. I think the other thing that makes it really interesting, easy in some ways, is the fact that with crypto, paying our employees in BNB, et cetera, you can avoid sort of the banking systems in each country. You can avoid potentially even having full-time employees in the way that they're considered and doing more contractor type of arrangements, things like that, which opens up a lot of flexibility to a company. We're seeing a lot of that in reality, now, post COVID, where this has, become even more and more common for other companies around the world.
Thank you, Ali. So before opening up for Q&A, one last question from Mansoor, just to cap things off here. What do you think is the main competitive advantage for Binance's internal ecosystem? So I talked about the external ecosystem mostly. Let's focus on the features and internal kind of different features in the apps they have on Binance. What's the main competitive advantage in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think the biggest one is just how in touch they are with their users and the community and the industry as a whole. And that comes into play in a few different areas, right? But Binance, being the leader in an industry that at times, maybe gets a bad rap when we look, what governments are saying, what different regulators are saying, they kind of take this position as whatever they're doing is going to set the standard for the industry. And so we've seen Binance launch the charity as an example, right? They launched the research arm. But even when we're talking about users, they're in touch with their users to provide the products and the new features on the platform that the users want as the industry evolves, right? And so we've seen them launch, like the decentralized exchange, staking, payments, NFTs, like the launch pad to push other projects through, right? To give them a stamp of approval. And so I think these are all really big things. At the same time, Binance has continued to expand, getting licenses in different regions so that they can be above board. I know that hasn't gone so well in some regions where they've kind of had to exit or put on pause. But then Binance has also gone on to acquire organizations such as Trust Wallet, DApp Review, Indian crypto exchange Wazir X, as well as CoinMarketCap. And so this is another way that they continue to expand their presence.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, both Ali and Mansoor. I'd like to open the floor up and invite Jana to lead the Q&A session by showing us some selected questions.
Thank you very much, Wesley. First question is more a general question about the future of the crypto industry, which we received by one of our alums, Paul Vogelsang, prior to the webinar. So the question is, in his research paper, Bitcoin, Currencies and Fragility, Nicholas Tedder presents an utterly negative point of view on Bitcoin, crypto, and even blockchain. So what do you think? Where is crypto heading right now? And is this critical view valuable?
Yeah, absolutely. I can touch on that, right? And I think you've got to break it down into different areas. I'm not, I haven't, of course, gone through that entire paper, super familiar with it, but, we hear a lot of these arguments come up quite a bit, right? So when you think about blockchain from a high level, you're essentially looking at a technology that can help solve multi-party trust issues. And, so when you have those scenarios, whether it's private blockchains or public blockchains, you can actually unlock a lot of value from inefficiencies between multiple parties trying to do business. And so we've seen a lot of, impact, and we run a venture capital firm. We see a lot of impact happening across enterprises from, supply chain to, music tech to ag tech, but you also then see it in areas where you can create entirely new economies, right? So you have, for example, play to earn gaming and NFTs, which then, based on a blockchain, but the ability to essentially track any item, in the digital world. And if you think about this, I mean, if we went back, I don't know, let's say 100 years, or if you go to a developing country with a lack of infrastructure and you said, hey, we don't actually know who owns the land, and you buy a house, you're not going to buy a house or land there, right? And it's the same thing in a digital world. Like in 20 years from now, I think people are going to, say, like, how did we not think we needed to track items in a digital world and ownership, right? It's almost inevitable. And so this creates a lot of value in that way. Of course, there's going to be concerns. So you see concerns that come up around, for example, the environmental impact of Bitcoin as an example is a common one that's been coming up recently. And there's, a big shift that's happening there right now. For example, China banned a lot of Bitcoin mining, tended to use, not the cleanest types of energy, a lot of coal energy, et cetera. And you've got a lot of that moving into renewables, for example, in North America or Europe. And so you do have this shift happening. You also can see that a lot of blockchains right now are shifting to consensus mechanisms that don't require as extensive energy, right? So Ethereum moving away from proof of work, for example, to proof of stake. So you see these types of shifts happening to secure networks in different ways that are also more sustainable.
Thank you very much. Next question goes towards Wesley. So where's the industry now, from your opinion? Is it still in the early adopter or like in the later group phase? And if a new entrant would now enter the market, would it still be an early adopter?
Could you repeat the second part of the question, Jana? If a new
entrant would now come into the market, would it still be considered an early adopter?
I must confess personally that I consider myself to be an early majority. I guess I was one of the majority customers who was watching from afar, right? So for me, I think the industry hasn't crossed the chasm, and I think there's quite a distance between now and when it crosses the chasm, if ever will. So Aly and Mansoor, feel free to disagree with me, but for me, I feel like a lot of things need to be set in place before the majority customers feel, number one, safe, and number two, convenient, and also see an application of a lot of these crypto projects in real life in order for this innovation to diffuse further. So case in point, right? Decentralized finance. I think the concept is great in the sense that you are in charge of your own money, right? So the money goes with you wherever you go, and you don't rely on an intermediary like a bank to hold your money for you. That's a great concept for a lot of people, especially for the early enthusiasts, right? But when you talk about the majority customers, right, who are very much used to having a centralized intermediary like banks, Chase, Bank of America, whatnot, to hold your money, it's actually a very foreign concept and takes a lot of convincing for people to say, hey, let me register for a MetaMask account, online crypto wallets, and put a lot of money into it. Most people wouldn't feel safe because of that. And the scams are not helping, right? So because you hear news of scams all the time from all sorts of media. And recently, Crypto.com, which is one of the largest exchanges out there, had a scam. I mean, on the grand scheme of things, $40 million worth of Bitcoins were stolen. $4 million worth of cryptos were stolen. Grand schemes, it was a small amount of money for Crypto.com, but still made headlines. So a lot of these things need to be aligned before it crosses the chasm. Aly, Mansoor, do you have a different opinion on that?
Yeah, I'll jump in first, and I'm sure Aly will have some things to add to it. So I think, yes, you're right. The industry, it is still early. We've seen tremendous growth over the last few years, but there's a long way to go, right? I mean, if you think just a couple of years ago, nobody would have wanted to been paid in Bitcoin just because it's so difficult to essentially use that for anything you need to pay for in your daily life, whether it's a coffee or bills. But I think I saw some research that came out just a couple of weeks ago on individuals under 30, where it was almost 50-50 in terms of how comfortable they would be receiving their salary in Bitcoin. So I think that marks a change, but it is still, predominantly among a younger audience.
Right.
I think, for the industry go, get to catch up to where the traditional space is. If you look at banking as an example, funds generally are insured, at least to a certain degree, right? And I know some crypto exchanges like Binance, they have a fund set up to ensure that their customers don't lose money in hacks. But I think as a standard for the industry, that isn't there yet, right? And obviously with so many governments still kind of being on the fence, some, more hostile, some less so, it doesn't give the public that much clarity. But Aly, if you want to jump in, I'm sure you have things to add to that.
Yeah, so I think just bringing it back to Binance, right? In terms of the competitiveness, I mean, it is competitive if you want to start a new startup and go head to head against Binance for, altcoins and trading and like those types of things, right? I mean, I think that's, you can see how many users they have, how sticky their platform is. But there is opportunities when you're looking at, say, launching like a decentralized derivatives exchange, right? Which is something that Binance doesn't do, but, still might facilitate some overlap of users that could be similar. Even looking at like NFT based exchanges, right? Like OpenSea as an example, launched after that. There's been several other strong NFT based exchanges, and so you can see these different opportunities still that might be in the crypto space and still related to exchanges, but maybe not going head to head and finding some unique value to compete. And some gap in the market, right? Similar to what Binance did when they started.
Jana, do you have more questions?
Sure. Thanks a lot. Next question goes towards regulation. So would you feel that actually the emerging regulations slowed down Binance growth, or would you say like in general, this benefited Binance? And with the increasing crypto regulations emerging right now, how do you see the impact of these regulations on the crypto industry?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we're seeing, of course, differences depending on the jurisdiction. I mean, some countries are clearly staying away from regulating it and not making a decision. Some have sort of decided to tax it, which means they're essentially regulating it in some way or allowing it. And then you've obviously got, some countries that have gone and banned it, right? So China was obviously a big one that we also covered in the case. I mean, within the days, the preceding days of that happening, you had a 20% decline in crypto prices globally, right? And so you can see that sort of thing. Of course, there's some jurisdictions like Ontario. I know the question came up as well. I saw in the Q&A on where Binance has gone and started to shut down sort of their operations in Ontario, or suspended them at least for the time being. You saw something similar right now happening in Singapore, where Binance has essentially started to shut down operations, and they've gone and invested in a licensed player or exchange rather than trying to compete directly without being licensed. And so you can see these things. Does it really slow down their growth? Of course, in those markets, it would to an extent. A lot of those users aren't going to, try to VPN and skirt some of those rules and all of that. But, in other markets, it doesn't seem to be slowing down too much. I mean, you see what Wesley mentioned, I mean, between 2020 and 2021, 7x growth in their volumes. And so, you do see that continuing, and that trajectory, I think, continuing right now to be quite strong.
Not only China's a very interesting case, right? Because it used to be, or it still is, but it used to be such an important, such a central part of the crypto ecosystem, so many activities. But I read somewhere, the Chinese government, sure, it's banned, like crypto usage within the country. But the thing is, there are a lot of funds within China, and some with ties to the government that have accumulated a huge position, right? So do you think maybe is there kind of like a strategy to hedge in case the cryptos take off? They want to be in the game?
I think that one's a little bit more complicated. I always find trying to dissect Chinese policy and government sort of views is one of the most difficult things out there. But I do know that there's been funds operating. There's been committees, for example. I believe Huobi was on a committee with the government. But then you saw China double down quite recently in those bans and regulation, and there's been several of these, but. It's gotten worse, right? They had a major lead on Bitcoin. For example, I remember, I believe in 2017, it was something like 80% of global Bitcoin activity was happening in Chinese yuan, right? Not in US dollars. And that has come a tremendous way now with Bitcoin mining essentially decimated in China, right? So it does seem like the Chinese government and Bitcoin in China has become less relevant over that time, and in some ways that's strengthened its position globally, right? Because that means it is more decentralized now, and it is more spread out, and all of that. So I think, you know, there's pros and cons to it, but it's definitely been a challenge.
So very quickly to add, I think there are different modes of regulation across the world. People oftentimes talk about, you know, the U.S. mode versus, you know, like the Chinese mode of regulation. I think the Western mode of regulation is more sort of, you know, let's try to regulate, but not try to suffocate innovation, right? So let's allow innovation to take place and see how it goes. So it's more kind of like a piecewise compared to the one kind of like one move, a very total, I guess, overall approach adopted by China. But either way, I think it's very interesting, and that speaks to Binance's strategy as a very agile organization that has to basically be sort of a nomad in terms of geographic location over time. Okay, Jana, can we have a one more question, please?
Sure, we can. So a lot of people here, we're receiving tons of questions, are really excited about getting started in the crypto industry. So from somebody who's really like in the know in this, what would be your tips for somebody who's just getting started in crypto? Do you have any advice on how to get acquainted with this topic?
I think that's a question for Mansoor and Aly.
Wesley, I thought you were going to take that one.
Maybe if I have something to add after you, go ahead. Yeah.
Sure. I think first step is probably reading and getting familiar with some of the basic concepts. I think like it is very tricky, you know, just as someone that's just getting started out, keeping track of private keys. So if you're using anything where, you know, you control your keys, you want to ensure those are absolutely safe, that nobody can, you know, access your funds, that sort of thing. If you're using centralized services, you have to understand that you're always putting yourself at some sort of risk that there's a hack to that service. So I'd say that's probably the first thing to watch out for, just being aware of what tools and services you're using.
Yeah, to add on to that, I think, you know, one of the big things you can do is just try things. I mean, go out there and like learn about some of these tools and just do them firsthand as well with, you know, something that you're not, you know, too worried or would impact you too much to lose, right? So, and I don't mean just buying crypto. I mean, that's a small thing these days, I would say, in the grand scheme of everything that's happening, right? I think it's, you know, go learn about staking, go learn about minting NFTs and try this out. I mean, you can find out about all of these different things that are happening. Try play to earn gaming, right? I mean, an article actually just came out on a portfolio company of ours called Splinterlands, which is one of the top play to earn games in the world. And someone started with $10, didn't invest $1 more, and it's worth $17,000 their assets now, right? But it's going out and trying these things and seeing actually what is the hype about. Make your own opinions on this then, because you've actually done it, right? It's hard to make an informed opinion or decision if you haven't gone and tried something. And so I would recommend or highly recommend just trying some of these different things, and you can do it with an extremely limited budget, like even dollars or less. I mean, just to try different things, try different blockchains. And I would say that's something that would help you to form your own opinions on this.
Very quickly, so I'm one of the majority kind of like customers, and Aly Mansoor more innovators. But for me, I would say just don't bet a farm. Don't bet a farm on any one crypto, and invest like a losable amount of money. So because honestly, it's so volatile, right? So volatile. And then when I started, I was reading, from a lot of these Reddit forums. And some people are saying that, oh, I use cryptos to hedge against the stock market or something. But after a while, I found experience to be totally the opposite. If anything, the crypto market is an amplification of the stock market, at least as of now. So from a novice's point of view, don't bet the farm, and try things, and make sure you're abide by the safety protocols. Yeah. Okay. Right. I think we have time to take more questions. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Wesley. Yes, and the next question goes in the exact same direction. So El Salvador recently, as we all know, introduced Bitcoin as a legal means of payment. So the question is, when do you expect us to see a larger adoption of use cases like this by other countries?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think you're seeing, with El Salvador, I mean, there's some great things that I think have happened. There's also some challenges, right? So at the end of the day, the transition to something like Bitcoin obviously is very difficult for a lot of small business owners, or sometimes it's easier to get like larger businesses to adopt a practice across a country or across all their branches or outlets. But for a lot of small businesses, this was a difficult rollout, right? Even what wallets are being permitted or allowed and who owns interest in those is something to consider, and how does that work, and can that become an issue if that wallet is centralized versus decentralized? These are things to think about as you go through these rollouts, and other countries are definitely looking at this to learn. There's also, of course, pressure that we've seen from the IMF and others looking at this whole aspect, and is this something that El Salvador should stop doing to be able to access IMF loans or other things, right? And so there's this global international pressure that's happening right now against El Salvador. So this is something that's important to take into consideration. There is discussions right now of other countries looking at this, right? I mean, Russia is definitely looking at this right now, and there's different things that have come out even today on the potential legal tender, but it still sort of fully remains to be seen how this rolls out across many countries, and if it rolls out across many countries. So I'd say this is still early to see. I think the more likely scenario that you're going to start seeing, and this isn't the ideal scenario, this is probably the more likely scenario, is CBDCs, right? So central bank digital currencies. You're seeing a lot of countries experiment with this. And in reality, it's essentially an advanced, like digital-based currency that you already run, and it gives the government more tools, more transparency into what's going on. It might not give the public more transparency. That's an important distinguishment as well as this rolls out. But we'll see different flavors of this, I think, from different countries.
Can I follow up with a related question? Maybe Aly Mansoor can also answer. So from my perspective, like if I register for like a MetaMask wallet, and I have a lot of coins in MetaMask, for example, I don't need to provide any sort of identification, right? All I need is a browser, right, or an email address or not. But then this is an issue for most governments, right? So if a lot of financial activities take place in a decentralized manner without some sort of identification, it's number one, hard for governments to collect taxes. And number two, if illegal activities happen through those channels, such as drug trafficking and arms sales, it's really hard for anyone to catch wind of it. So how do you think these issues can be resolved?
Go ahead, Mansoor.
So I was gonna say, so if someone gives you cash right now, the government doesn't know about it, right? I think even in MetaMask, you don't have to provide identification, but anytime you use another service, right? So whether you're gonna take it to exchange, withdraw to a bank, there's so many places where you're trying to convert crypto to fiat, where you will have to present ID. And then even there's a tremendous number of crypto services. So all exchanges, you will need to provide ID. So I don't think that is actually the biggest issue. And blockchain, it is pseudo-anonymous in that your name, your identity isn't always known with each transaction, but that wallet is always known, and any other interaction that you have. So if you transfer something to a bank account one time, all of the wallets that you have that are linked to that are essentially labeled as being yours, right? And there's sophisticated solutions now, and they're continuing to get more sophisticated in being able to identify whose funds or whose a wallet belongs to.
And to sort of top that off, right? I mean, in reality, when you look at traditional KYC, you've got once an AML, right, anti-money laundering. I mean, banks will look one step back, one step forward, essentially. In crypto, adding on to what Mansoor was saying, you can see the entire history. It is not a great tool that you want to be using for this, right? And a clear example of that's actually something that came out yesterday. So you may have seen in 2016, we covered this in the case, but Bitfinex got hacked for $72 million. So it was 119,000 Bitcoin. And yesterday, the Department of Justice in the United States actually seized this. So it was 3.6 billion when they seized it. Value of, as of yesterday, was $4.5 billion worth of Bitcoin. And so it does come around. Like, sure, they, were able to get away for 5-6 years, but it caught up. And so that's not a great tool when you can track every single transaction and see where everything's going. And so I think that, goes to show that, there's probably other tools that are better for this, but crypto generally is not a great one.
Yeah, no, I think maybe we'll have time for one more question. Yeah.
Sure. So we have a lot of people here who would love to get started in crypto. So from your take, what is better to start, a centralized or decentralized exchange to invest in?
I think, as I was saying earlier, I think you've got to make that opinion for yourself. I think go sign up to a centralized exchange, go sign up to, or go, get a MetaMask wallet or one of the other decentralized, wallets, and go try some of the different DEXs, right? And make the opinion for yourself. You're going to see very clear distinctions between, like, say, customer support, UI, UX. Like, you're going to see very clear difference in that customer experience, but you're going to get to see the benefits yourself, right? You don't need big amounts of money to do this. Even with a couple of dollars, you can start to figure this out on your own and make your own decisions. And then, I think that's probably the best way to go for everyone here. It's also fun. Just try it out.
I will say this. I think, I signed up for MetaMask in order to participate on Sandbox, which is a metaverse related project. And I have my wife and I are expecting a son. So my plan is to buy a piece of land for my son once he is born. So that's one of the reasons why I signed up for MetaMask in the first place. Otherwise, my first choice was to go for a centralized exchange like Binance, Crypto.com, where the interface is much more relatable. If you had previous accounts with, like, stock exchanges before. Yeah.
That is a great present for your son, I have to say, and it might be even a good college fund if it does well enough.
Maybe. Let's hope the price don't go up too much between now and the birth. Yeah. So awesome. Shall we say? Let's wrap up. Thank you very much again to all the audience. I would like to forgot to thank Accenture for sponsoring this talk. So I'd like to thank Accenture for doing that. And thank you, Aly Madhavji and Mansoor Madhavji, for participating. And thank you very much, Jana, for taking charge of the Q&A. So thank you, everyone. And see you next time. Bye-bye.